You're lying about needing to stay in the hospital longer. You just want to avoid doing housework. Why don't you hurry back and make yourself useful to me?"
The first thing that greeted us when we entered Emily's house was Ken's incredibly vile shouting. Even though Emily just gave birth and her body has yet to recover fully, Ken was mercilessly yelling at her. It was a terrifying sight.
"Just lay the baby down somewhere. You should be thinking about me first. Get to taking care of me right now."
Ken had forcibly brought Emily home from the hospital, where she had been staying due to her slow recovery. He continued to hurl abuse at her, even though she looked pale and was on the verge of collapsing. Emily, holding her newborn baby, was made to sit on the hard floor, unable to resist. For a moment, I was stunned by the scene, but I couldn't stand by any longer and rushed over to Emily.
"Stop right there."
Just as I was about to reach Emily, her mother-in-law, Sarah, who had come to visit her house with me, shouted and blocked my way. What was this? Were they planning to torment Emily together? I couldn't let them put Emily through this any longer. I brushed Sarah aside and tried to hug Emily. At that moment, with a demonic expression, Sarah shouted, "Enough already," and raised her fist. She was going to hit me. I covered Emily and closed my eyes. The next thing I heard was a dull thud as something fell to the ground. What was that sound? Fortunately, it seemed we hadn't been hit. I cautiously opened my eyes, and the sight that met my eyes was beyond anyone's imagination. An unexpected person had come to our rescue. Sarah, still fuming with anger, stood frozen in shock, while Ken looked on in disbelief, and Emily trembled in fear. Seeing this ghastly scene in front of me, I gasped. My name is Amanda. I married my husband 30 years ago, and we built a house in the city, as it is convenient for both our commutes. Even after giving birth to our only daughter, Emily, thanks to my husband's support with housework and childcare, I was able to balance work and family life. Though we were not wealthy, we raised Emily without any difficulties and built a peaceful home. Emily got married a few years ago and now lives in the suburbs, far from our home. With our child-rearing days behind us and the mortgage paid off, my husband and I spent our days planning our early retirement and enjoying our time together. Meanwhile, Emily and her husband, Ken, bought a house in the suburbs and were working hard as a dual-income family. Although we didn't see them often due to the distance, we trusted Ken completely. He had a gentle nature and took great care of Emily. When he visited to introduce himself before the wedding, the tender look he gave Emily left a strong impression on me. He had a completely opposite personality to Emily's straightforward nature, and we often laughed, thinking he would probably be a husband who would be under her thumb after marriage. We were eagerly awaiting the birth of a new life. Every day was filled with happiness. But one day, everything changed with a phone call from Emily.
"Mom, I'm worried if I can build a proper family once the baby is born."
Her voice over the phone sounded weak and a bit frightened. As I listened in detail, I learned that Emily's life was far different from what we had imagined.
You've worked hard all this time, so now take care of yourself and spend time with the baby in your belly.
Happy with her husband's words, as she entered the final stage of pregnancy, Emily quit her job and started preparing for the birth as a stay-at-home mom, at his request. However, after those words, his personality suddenly changed, and his kind demeanor vanished as if it had been a lie. He began to throw heartless words at Emily.
Who do you think you are, lazing around every day and not doing any housework? Whose money do you think you're living on?
Ken shouted mercilessly at Emily, who was suffering from severe late pregnancy morning sickness and back pain, unable to move as she wanted.
Pregnancy isn't a disease. You're just exaggerating because you're a little tired. You just want to skip out on housework, don't you?
Emily couldn't keep quiet and repeatedly argued back, explaining the symptoms that occur in late pregnancy, seeking his understanding, but Ken wouldn't listen at all, instead continuing to berate her, drowning out her words.
I work all day and I'm tired. Hurry up and prepare dinner. Bring me change of clothes. Haven't you filled the bath yet? Stop being so lazy.
With her hormones in disarray from the pregnancy and being subjected to her husband's heartless tirades every day, Emily became trapped in negative thinking, constantly expressing fears about the future. This was a side of Ken we couldn't imagine from the kind person we knew. However, Emily's trembling, tearful voice was undeniably genuine. I repeatedly urged Emily to divorce and come back home, but she decided to endure a bit longer, hoping her husband would return to his kind self after the baby was born. Perhaps she couldn't forget the kind husband he once was. But I couldn't leave my precious Emily and grandchild with Ken, who had such a drastic change in personality. Thinking this, I encouraged Emily to seek help from Sarah, who knew Ken the best. Emily's father-in-law, Tom, had already passed away, but Sarah was still alive and lived near the couple. I believed that Sarah, having experienced pregnancy and childbirth herself, would surely side with Emily. However, Emily said, Sarah told me I could always consult her if I was in trouble, but she hasn't contacted me once since I got pregnant. This only deepened my mistrust of Sarah. Could it be that Sarah was aware of Ken's wrongdoing and chose to ignore it? Perhaps Sarah was secretly manipulating Ken. Ken's drastic change was hard to believe, especially given the gentle look he had shown Emily when we first met. It's entirely possible that Sarah was behind it. Various speculations ran through my mind. If no one nearby was on Emily's side, then I had to protect her myself. I continued to call Emily frequently and listened to her talk. Although our discussions about divorce remained deadlocked, I had promised to stay at a hotel near Emily's house after the birth to help her during her postpartum period. I decided to wait until then to try and persuade her directly to consider divorce. Just a little more patience. I repeated this to myself many times. Then suddenly, Emily contacted me.
Mom, the baby has been born.
What? There should have been about a week left until the due date. and to receive such sudden news without any prior warning was extremely puzzling. As soon as I hung up the phone, my husband and I headed to the hospital. According to the doctor, Emily's water had broken suddenly, and labor had begun. Until then, the pregnancy had been progressing smoothly without any issues, but the doctor said she must have been under a lot of stress. Ken immediately came to mind. It had to be the stress from him. Although the baby was born prematurely, fortunately, it was healthy and cried strongly at birth. However, Emily had lost a lot of blood during the delivery and was under observation by the doctor, lying in bed. She couldn't even hold her newborn baby, as multiple tubes connected her to various medical devices. I stayed at a hotel and went to the hospital every day to take care of Emily. Emily's body was gradually recovering, but it seemed it would still be a while before the doctor would allow her to be discharged. One day, while my husband and I were walking down the hospital corridor to visit Emily, we happened to run into Ken coming from the opposite direction. He had probably just left Emily's room. Normally, we would share the joy of the baby's birth, but my irritation grew due to Emily's stories about him. He also seemed inexplicably irritable. Wasn't he happy about the birth of his child? Ken, it's been a while. Congratulations on the birth of your adorable baby. Are you here to visit Emily today? I suppressed my irritation, put on my best smile, and spoke calmly.
Oh, Amanda, thank you for always taking care of Emily. How long does she plan to stay in the hospital? It's been a week since the birth, and she still hasn't been discharged. She must be asking the doctor to keep her in.
Ken's attitude left my husband and me speechless. Ken was a different person from the one we met before the wedding. Thinking about how Emily endured such nasty comments from Ken every day made me even more upset.
Can't you do something about her laziness? She's using pregnancy as an excuse to laze around and avoid housework. And now, she's extending her hospital stay just because it's comfortable. How long does she plan to neglect me?
Before encountering us, he must have bombarded Emily with complaints and sarcasm in the hospital room. Even after that, his irritation hadn't subsided, and he directed his frustration at us.
Ken, that's enough. How can you speak like that? Are you really Emily's husband and the father of your child? Grow up already. Emily is going through a tough time right now. You can take care of yourself. Stop acting like a spoiled child.
My husband, usually calm, had finally reached his breaking point. With an expression I'd never seen before, he glared harshly at Ken. It seemed Ken had never been reprimanded so severely before. He fell silent, his face turning pale, and began to tremble slightly. He looked like a young boy scolded by his parents. He's a weak man who only acts tough around those weaker than himself. That's why he became overbearing as soon as Emily quit her job and lost her income. Emily could never be happy with a man like him. I was certain of this as I headed to Emily's hospital room, glancing at Ken's frightened expression. There was nothing more to say to him. The next day, as usual, My husband and I visited Emily's hospital room in the early afternoon. But when we entered, we were stunned by the unexpected sight. The bed was neatly made, and Emily was nowhere to be seen. We stared at the empty bed for a while. What on earth was going on? Just then, a nurse came into the room and removed the nameplate with Emily's name from the bed. "Excuse me, where did the patient in this bed go?" I asked the nurse hastily. She looked surprised and answered quietly,
"This morning, her husband came and took her home. The doctor tried to persuade him to let her stay longer, but he wouldn't listen and insisted on home care."
Ken had ignored the doctor's advice and forcibly taken Emily home. We felt a sense of danger for Emily and hurried out of the hospital. We got into a taxi and headed to Emily's house. Suddenly, my phone rang and I quickly answered. It was Emily.
Mom, help me. I'm at home. I can't stand up because of anemia.
Emily's faint voice was desperate for help. She must have called when Ken wasn't around. We had to save Emily as soon as possible. My husband looked at me and nodded firmly. "Emily, hang on, we're on our way." Ken was likely in a very agitated state. It might be difficult for just the two of us to persuade Ken and rescue Emily. So we contacted Sarah and asked her to come to Emily's house. We briefly explained Ken's recent behavior, and Sarah seemed to understand. However, this was a huge gamble for us. Sarah might side with Ken. She could easily take her son's side over us outsiders. But Ken's actions were inexcusable. We couldn't justify forcibly discharging a patient who needed rest for his own selfish reasons. Sarah needed to know this unforgivable reality. The taxi carrying us finally stopped in front of Emily's house. We hurriedly got out of the taxi and stood at the front door. My heart pounded so hard from extreme tension that it felt like it was beating through my entire body. With trembling hands, I reached for the doorknob and pushed it. The door opened with a slight click. It wasn't locked. I signaled my husband with my eyes and entered the house. He nodded and followed me. Suddenly, we heard Ken's shouting coming from the living room.
"You're just using childbirth as an excuse to avoid housework. Why don't you hurry up and get discharged so you can be useful to me?"
We quickly moved through the hallway and peeked into the living room, only to be confronted by a horrifying sight.
"How many times do I have to tell you? Stop sitting around and start working. How long are you going to neglect housework? Even with that face, you won't fool me."
Emily was breathing heavily, her face pale and her eyes so vacant they seemed ready to close at any moment. Yet, she was desperately holding her baby, sitting on the hard floor. Despite Emily's condition, Ken continued to hurl insults at her.
"Just lay the baby down somewhere. Think about me first. Take care of me right now."
How could he say this was laziness when Emily looked like she was on the brink of collapse? This situation was far from normal.
Enough already.
My husband couldn't stand it any longer and stepped in front of Emily, glaring sharply at Ken. At the same time, I rushed to Emily and hugged her. "Emily, it's okay now." Ken's eyes widened in surprise at our unexpected appearance, and sweat beaded on his forehead, trickling down his cheeks.
What? Who are you people?
His voice shook, unable to hide his agitation, as he stumbled backward. Ken's previously arrogant attitude towards Emily changed completely, and he suddenly became frightened. Ken's true nature was revealed, an overbearing person who only bullied those weaker than himself. How painful it must have been for Emily to endure such treatment. I could never forgive Ken. Just then,
Enough already.
a sudden loud voice startled us, and we turned to see Sarah storming into the living room, her face full of anger. She stopped in front of us and suddenly raised her fist. Was she going to hit Emily? Why did Emily have to suffer even more? I tried to protect Emily, covering her trembling body with mine and closing my eyes. Then I heard a dull thud of something falling. It didn't hurt. Apparently, we hadn't been hit. I cautiously opened my eyes to see Sarah standing tall, and behind her, Ken lay on the floor.
Ouch. Mom, why did you suddenly hit me?
Ken, tears in his eyes, held his cheek and rolled on the floor. What was happening? My husband and I were stunned by the sight. Sarah then turned to us, gasping, and suddenly apologized.
I am so sorry. I had no idea my son's behavior towards Emily was so terrible.
As she apologized deeply, her voice trembled.
If I had been more involved, maybe this wouldn't have happened. My son told me not to contact Emily because she found it burdensome, and I foolishly believed him and refrained from reaching out. I'm truly sorry.
Even as we repeatedly urged her to raise her head, Sarah remained still. Then Emily, summoning her strength, spoke up.
I never said it was a burden. I was very happy when you told me I could talk to you about anything.
It became clear that Ken had also distorted the relationship between Sarah and Emily.
Shut up. Don't say anything unnecessary.
Suddenly, Ken stood up and raised his hand toward Emily. Danger. I moved to shield Emily once more, and my husband tried to restrain Ken, but at that moment, there was a sharp slap. Ken slapped twice on the cheek, collapsed onto the floor, eyes wide in shock, looking up at Sarah.
Mom, what are you doing? Aren't you on my side? I'm your son.
Sarah's hand was trembling. She clenched her fist tightly, struggling to suppress her rising anger.
My son, I don't remember raising such a pathetic man. You are a coward who bullies the weak.
However, she couldn't suppress her anger, and it exploded. Sarah fiercely scolded Ken.
Emily doesn't have her parents nearby to rely on. That's why I told you to support her. How could you let her down like this?
We were astonished by Sarah's words. She hadn't distanced herself from Emily, she was genuinely concerned for her.
Pregnancy is far more taxing on the body than men realize. I repeatedly told you to do as much housework as you could, and to let Emily rest after she was discharged, but you ignored everything I said.
Hearing Sarah's words, Emily broke down in tears. It was as if the tension that had held her together suddenly snapped. I gently picked up the baby and helped Emily lie down on the sofa.
And then you forcibly discharged her and demanded she take care of you. Who do you think you are? Can't you do anything on your own? How can someone like you be a father? Get your act together and start over.
Ken, unable to resist Sarah's furious tirade, shrank smaller and smaller, muttering, I'm sorry," in a small voice.
How could you let Emily, in such a weakened state, sit on this hard floor? You sit there for a while too.
Defeated by Sarah's forcefulness, Ken, exhausted and looking as if his soul had left his body, sat down on the hard floor, staring blankly at one spot. Then my husband, Sarah, and I began discussing Emily and the baby's future. Sarah repeatedly apologized to Emily, promising to do whatever she could to help. Emily then sat up and said, I'm considering divorce. Her color seemed to have returned, suggesting she was feeling better. As we nodded in agreement with Emily's decision, Ken suddenly stood up and rushed over to her.
You can't be serious about divorce. Please don't say that. I can't live without you.
He quickly changed his tone, as if all his previous insults had been lies.
I can't do this anymore. I hoped you would change after the baby was born, but I'm at my limit.
Emily refused to look him in the eye, shaking her head no matter what he said.
Please, I'm truly sorry for everything. I'll do anything from now on, including helping with the baby and housework. Just don't divorce me.
Ken begged repeatedly, but his plea was not accepted, and he was finally excluded from the discussion. The four of us agreed that Emily would return to the hospital for further care. Once she was well enough to be discharged, she would stay with us for a while.
This house is strangely clean. Despite my absence, everything is so tidy.
Emily remarked while packing for her return to the hospital, tilting her head in suspicion. Indeed, the entire house was impeccably organized. Ken, who couldn't do any housework, couldn't possibly have cleaned so thoroughly. Sarah and I exchanged glances. Sarah repeatedly asked Ken, You cleaned this place so well, but he remained silent, his eyes darting nervously. He was definitely hiding something. Following his gaze, eyesight was directed at the trash can. In the trash were several crumpled pieces of white paper. I picked them up and smoothed them out, restoring them to their original shape. They turned out to be flyers for a housekeeping service and several business cards from nightclubs with women's names on them. When I looked at Ken, he averted his eyes with a guilty expression.
The passbook that was kept here is missing.
Suddenly, Emily cried out. What do you mean the passbook is missing?
Before I was hospitalized, I definitely put it in this drawer. It's a very important passbook. We've been saving every month since we got married for our future child.
When I looked at Ken again, sweat was beading on his forehead, and his eyes shifted to the scattered flyers and newspapers on the table. How transparent he was. I was certain the passbook Emily was looking for was somewhere on that table. I began picking up the flyers and newspapers one by one. Sure enough, the passbook was buried among them. Emily, is this the passbook you're looking for? Emily nodded, hurriedly opened the passbook, and checked the balance. Suddenly, her face turned pale, and she collapsed onto the floor.
Why is the balance so low?
It turned out that a large amount of cash had been withdrawn the day after Emily was hospitalized. Of course, the only people who knew the account's PIN were Emily and Ken. All four of us, Emily, Sarah, my husband, and I, fixed our gaze on Ken, who stiffened even more. Under the intense questioning from Emily and our cold stares, Ken finally broke down and confessed. His explanation was incredibly selfish. After Emily was hospitalized, Ken, who had never done any housework, didn't even know how to take out the trash. The house quickly became a mess, and soon it turned into a garbage house. Fearing that Emily would see the mess and think he was incapable, losing his ability to boss her around, Ken hastily hired a housekeeping service to clean the house a day before Emily was discharged. However, the amount withdrawn far exceeded what was needed for the housekeeping service. Upon further questioning, Ken admitted that he had been indulging himself in nightlife, spending vast sums of money at clubs while Emily was in the hospital.
You did what while I was gone? We promised when we got married to save that money for our future children. You only contributed a few $1,000s at the beginning. I've been saving alone since then. Most of the money in that account is mine.
Ken, who had discovered nightlife during Emily's pregnancy, began spending most of his salary at clubs. But when his money ran out, he turned to Emily's savings.
No, you don't understand. I felt lonely, and I knew things would get busy once the baby was born. I just wanted to have a little fun before then. I was planning to return the money.
Ken's desperate excuses were completely unconvincing and only dug him deeper.
Then return it now. You act tall, high, and mighty in front of me, but grovel before my parents. What do you take me for? Am I your maid? You yell at me to do perfect housework, but you can even take out the trash and use my money for housekeeping services. And then you waste a fortune at clubs, basking in attention. How enjoyable that must have been.
Emily's anger grew, and she delivered her final blow.
I was a fool to marry a good-for-nothing like you. From now on, we are strangers. When I get discharged, you'll sign the divorce papers.
Ken turned red and began shouting incoherent words. He scratched his head, looking both confused and terrified, a bizarre sight. The Ken we knew was gone.
You are truly pathetic, as your mother. I'm ashamed of you. What you did is unforgivable. You need to atone for your sins and rebuild your life on your own.
Sarah then promised that, in addition to the compensation we had agreed upon for Emily, Ken would repay the entire amount he withdrew from Emily's savings. Considering Emily's mental and physical suffering, the compensation was substantial, and Ken would also have to repay tens of thousands of dollars. Ken's hardship would continue. But this was the price of his actions, and there was no room for sympathy. Emily's recovery progressed smoothly, and she was discharged a few days after being readmitted. Now she lives with us, adjusting to taking care of her baby and enjoying peaceful days. The divorce was finalized through a lawyer. Ken managed to pay the compensation by scraping together his savings and income from part-time night jobs. However, the repayment of Emily's savings was to be done in installments, ensuring a life filled with work for him. Ken begged Sarah to take him back, but she disowned him, saying, "I have no room for such a disgraceful person." He was forced to live quietly in his house, still burdened with a mortgage. Unable to manage basic tasks like taking out the trash and working late every day, his house began to accumulate garbage once more. It wouldn't be long before it turned into a garbage house again. At work, Ken faced even more challenges. Coincidentally, a colleague's wife had been hospitalized in the same hospital as Emily. The two women supported each other in the same room and enjoyed their time in the hospital. Unaware of this, Ken forcibly discharged Emily against her will. The entire incident was witnessed by his colleague's wife, who then spread the rumor throughout the company. After the divorce, Ken became a pariah at work, avoided by everyone, and subjected to whispers and gossip. Despite this, he couldn't quit because he needed the income to pay the compensation and mortgage. Even though his performance suffered, he had no choice but to cling to his job. It should have ended there, but Ken repeatedly called Emily lonely, miserable, and begging to start over. He tried to elicit sympathy, but Emily, now completely recovered, was unmoved. "Don't waste your time calling me. If you have time to spare, work and pay back the money," she would snap at him and then hang up each time. Ken's persistent calls, whether out of loneliness, a desire to escape repayment, or just wanting a maid, remained a mystery. But rather than ponder such trivial matters, we focused on the adorable new life in front of us, enjoying a happy and healthy lifestyle. Emily's baby girl resembled her, and taking care of her felt like reliving our days of raising Emily. I retired from my job, planning to help with the child care and enjoy watching my grandchild grow. Emily, too, motivated by her daughter, was eager to return to work and save money.
Wow, she's already laughing so much. She looks just like you, Emily, and she's so cute.
Even though we cut ties with Ken, we stayed in touch with Sarah through video calls, sharing updates on the baby. Sarah was supportive of Emily's parenting and cherished her granddaughter, maintaining a friendly relationship with us.
I found the cutest outfit the other day. I couldn't resist buying it, so I'll bring it over.
With our granddaughter's half-birthday approaching, we planned a big celebration and invited Sarah. You couldn't visit often due to the distance. We intended to thank her in person once more. Thank you for standing by Emily back then.